Hello friend, today on this channel we're going to try to solve the age-old question, whether shooting film is worth it. I think though to answer that question it would be helpful if I knew a few things about you. When you think about where you are or where you want to be with photography, which person are you? Are you someone who defines yourself as a professional photographer, or do you hope that at some point in the future you'll be a professional photographer? Want to make money with film? Is the economy of how your photography business runs, is that important? Are you just a hobbyist? Are you someone who enjoys the process and you really like the collectability of old cameras, learning about them, learning the history? Do you like to tinker with new processes, trying new things, experimenting with the different variables and trying to get different outcomes? Does that sound like you? Or are you someone new to the photography hobby entirely and you just want to take really cool photos and this is the first spot you've landed? I think to determine whether shooting film is a worthwhile and valid endeavor for you, I think knowing what type of photographer you are or where you want to be in the hobby, I think that's a really important thing to know up front. For example, I have a really good friend. He loves shooting sports. It's the only thing he really cares about shooting. Any night of the week, he's in a high school gym or on a high school football field taking pictures of student athletes doing what they love. And it's his favorite thing. This is the only genre of photography that I know this guy to participate in. In my mind, film would be a terrible choice for this guy. Every night he goes to a game, he shoots thousands of images, trying to get the perfect moment. I think probably film is not suited for that. Number one, rolls of film are expensive. Number two, it would just be cumbersome changing your rolls in and out so quickly in the middle of the game, missing moments of the shot. And number three, the old cameras just aren't well suited to that high-paced, high-volume shooting. So all that's to say, I think that what you're going to be doing in photography really matters when you determine whether or not this is a road that you should go down. So here are a few of my observations about film photography. I think the first and most important thing to address, and this is the biggest distinction between film and digital, is the process. Shooting film is oftentimes slower or very, very, very much slower than digital photography. Even in the best circumstances, film photography is pretty slow. But if you're using an old camera that's all manual everything, manual exposure, manual metering, manual focus, everything, the process can be painstakingly slow. If that's not something that you're after, as pointed out with the sports scenario previously, it can really be a problem. There are folks out there though who love that slower process, and that's one of the biggest draws to the hobby itself. In my own life, for example, I'm a public defender, right? And I've got thousands of cases, right? Just a very busy job, very busy guy. And I feel like I'm rushing all the time. And film photography uniquely allows me to slow down. It makes me slow down. If you don't slow down, you're punished. And that's another thing to point out too, how deliberate and unforgiving film photography can be. So that has to be something that you're after. You don't need to come into film photography if you're expecting a very fast, high-speed workflow. It is just much slower. And it's not just the shooting process itself. After you shoot your films, you're gonna have to be diligent to get your films to the lab to actually get them developed, or you're gonna have to go through the process to develop them yourself. Whichever way you go, whether you decide to develop on your own or send it to a lab, either way, it's gonna take a lot more time. It's not as simple as just plopping your images off of your memory card and onto your computer and then boom, upload them into Adobe Lightroom. So that is something that's worth noting. The other thing to know about film photography is that the process isn't very forgiving. When you go out and you shoot through a roll of 36 exposures on your brand new 35mm camera, you have no way of knowing what's on that roll until your films are developed. If you had your exposure compensation all the way up or all the way down, you're not gonna know that until you get back. If there was something wrong with the camera's metering system, you're not gonna know that until you get the images back. So film photography, unforgiving. Film photography requires that you know your camera and you're very methodical with your system to make sure that you aren't making any of these mistakes. Otherwise, you'll be punished. I don't mean like actually punished, but like it'll be a lot of money and you're gonna be frustrated when you get your images back. I do think there are benefits that come along with that slower, more deliberate process though, and I do think that if you do it long enough, it will no doubt make you a better photographer. I think the more time you spend thinking about your shots, thinking about the process, being careful with what you do, and being aware of the choices that you're making when it comes to constructing an image, I think that that's going to trickle over in the event that you do move over to digital or anything like that down the road. The lessons that you'll learn in film photography are valuable, but you're comparing that slower, more deliberate style with the digital process. And I pointed it out earlier, when I go out and shoot a model with my digital camera, number one, I'm getting 500 or 600, 700 images when I go out to shoot. Tons of shots, right? If I'm shooting on film, I'm just not gonna take that many. Number one, the cameras are slower. Number two, it's expensive. We're not just firing off a bazillion shots for no reason. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I'm gonna come back to the house, I'm gonna pull that memory card out of the camera, slide it into my computer, we're gonna upload those images into Lightroom, drop a preset on them, and they're gonna be substantially done after some cropping and minor edits. The whole process, you can go from having shot your images to fully edited portraits in a matter of a few hours, whereas there is no workflow in film photography that will allow you to be that economical with your time. So if you're a working professional, and I mean in the conventional sense, I'm not talking about a YouTuber, I'm not talking about somebody who sells prints, I'm talking about a conventional photographer. I'm thinking about somebody who goes out and they're promising senior pictures and they've got to have them delivered in a couple weeks, or a wedding photographer, right? That's the business that I'm in. As much as I love film photography, as much as I love the look of film, it doesn't really fit my professional workflow. So that's something to be aware of. And you want to have a photography business and you want to start shooting weddings and all these different things, and money is tight, you can't afford to be in both systems and bounce back and forth between film and digital, you're gonna wanna buy into the camera and the workflow that best suits your end goal. So we talked about the differences in the process. Another thing that's worth talking about is the resolution. Now, most of us know that film has fantastic resolution. From medium format all the way to 8x10 large format, we all know that there are avenues in film photography to get incredible resolution. But most folks, when they go into film photography, are gonna be looking at 35mm cameras. And while 35mm is a fantastic format, and it's the format that I shoot most, it does have its limitations. That is a very small sliver of film. And when you're shooting a piece of film that small, resolution is gonna be a concern. It's something that you're gonna have to think about. If your intention is to make a 20x30 print or an image that's gonna be spread out on a wall, big and nice, you gotta think about resolution. And I've seen estimates online regarding the resolution of 35mm ranging from anywhere from 6 megapixels all the way to 20, but in my experience, it's towards the bottom end of that. It is closer to that 6 megapixel range. Especially when you start going up in ISO, it seems that that resolution drops off rather quickly. So at least in my experience, what you're looking at in terms of viable print options with 35mm, anywhere from 11x14 inch to perhaps 16x20 inch. Those are gonna be about as big as you're gonna be able to get out of a piece of 35mm film. If you're a landscape photographer and you demand that exacting, precise, ultra high resolution image, either you're gonna have to think about large format photography, 4x5, 8x10, something like that, or you're gonna wanna go the way of digital. Enough about resolution, let's move on to the aesthetic. There can be no doubt, if you spent time on Instagram, film images have a certain look. They tend to make things look older and grainier, and there's a definite aesthetic there at play that is quite charming. Either you want that or you don't. If that aesthetic is something that's important to you, that's something to consider as well. Or if you want the crispy, clean, ultra high resolution, really sharp, detailed lines come with digital, that's something to be aware of too. The choice of whether to go with film or digital is definitely going to have an impact on the way that those images turn out. There's a difference in the way they look, and that's something to be aware of. The last thing I'm going to talk about is cost. Film cameras, at least over the past few years, have been rising in prices, but a film camera is one of those things. You buy it once, you're kind of done. Not like Nikon or Canon have any new film cameras in the works that we're going to be able to buy in the next few years. Even if you did want to upgrade your camera to the latest version, there probably is no latest version. Apart from a few manufacturers, folks aren't really developing film cameras anymore, so the film cameras that we have are the ones we have, and they're all just essentially a dark place to put your film. Obviously lenses differ, but that's another topic for another day. With digital cameras at least, there is an expectation that every few years they're going to be upgrading your camera. That just doesn't exist in film photography. Most people buy a camera and that's the camera they use for a really long time. So on the front end, the film camera is going to be much cheaper most of the time, looking at you, Leica, and there isn't an expectation that you're going to need to upgrade down the road. So realistically, we're looking at a cheap camera on the front end, and then the cost, the revolving cost that kind of churns as you shoot, of shooting film. It's going to be $10 to $20 per roll, and then you're going to have to spend $8 to $10 to get that roll of film developed. Well, if you're buying expensive cameras, you can shoot a lot of rolls of film for the amount of money that it would cost to shoot a new digital camera. So it depends on your shooting volume. At least in my situation, I very rarely feel like the cost of my film cameras and the revolving cost of shooting film exceeds what I would pay for a digital camera setup, and then the pressure to change bodies every few years. So that's something to be aware of as well. The costs are different. Modern cameras cost more, but old cameras, you shoot and you have the revolving cost of film. So film may appear cheaper on the front end, but if you're shooting a lot, I can see a world where you may end up spending more on film than digital. So to answer the question, is shooting film worth it? I think it depends on who you are. If you want to go out and be a professional sports shooter, absolutely not. You don't need to shoot film. But if you're someone who wants to learn photography and you're interested in that slower, more deliberate process, you love cool old cameras like that are back on my shelf back there, film is a really cool place to be. I think the best thing that you can say about film photography is you'll be learning. As long as you're shooting, you will be learning. These old cameras will teach you something if you spend enough time with them. So I think it's a very good place to be. A modern high-resolution landscape photographer? Maybe not. A high-end portrait photographer? Maybe. There are lots of different uses for digital and film cameras out there, and you just have to weigh what your expectations are, what the expenses are, and whether or not that's going to work for you. But if you shoot film, let me know in the comments. Why do you shoot film? What's your reason behind it? But if after watching this video, all the talk about the process and the unforgiving nature of film hasn't steered you away, I have 5 affordable medium format camera suggestions for you to take a look at. Check out this video, and it may help you make a choice on which camera to buy in the future. Otherwise, guys, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.